How's everyone going? Excited to be here today? First up this morning, we have Scott Percival talking about reverse engineering is good and also for everyone. So give him a warm round of applause.
Testing. 1, 2. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Civils. Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Reverse Engineering is Good and also for everyone. Now, there's probably going to be a wide range of backgrounds and experience levels in the room today. So we're pretty much, I guess the majority is going to have much of a software background, so we're going to be talking about reverse engineering in that space. And it's basically just going to be explaining the different types of analysis and giving some general rules of thumb for getting started. So if you're already an experienced reverse engineer, there's a chance that this talk probably won't tell you much more than you already know, but hopefully you can appreciate that it's a very kind of difficult field to get started out with. So actually you all get a special challenge today, and that is to try and think of ways of making these techniques more accessible. So you get a little challenge. Before I want to go on, I just wanted to thank all of the amazing sponsors and, more importantly, all of the staff behind the scenes, guiding people around and working the AV here at DDD Perth 2018 today. It's an amazing privilege to be here to speak to you all today, and it would not be possible without everyone in this room. Also, hi everyone on the internet, everyone on Twitch. So, let's get on with the introductions. My name is Scott. I am a former disgraced chemical engineer turned software developer. I'm also an instructor with Perth Parkour. Hello to any professors watching. Yeah, I love you all. You're amazing. And I love reverse engineering. So up there on the screen there is one of my more recent projects. I like to call it How to Turn Your Car into a Giant Joystick for $20. This is basically, the premise is I go on eBay, I buy the cheapest car diagnostic cable I can find, listen to all of the sensor readings that are coming off my car, and then use it to play video games. So right now I'm actually not doing too bad at Space Harrier there. I think after that would be Mirror's Edge. Yes, that well-known racing game, Mirror's Edge. So yeah, I love reverse engineering, and like for the longest time, I wanted to become like not just any kind of reverse engineer. I wanted to become the kind that could have literally any problem thrown at them, and they'd be able to solve it from scratch. And I know these people existed because I've seen them working on most of them like emulator type projects like ScumVM and MAME and all of these and these people that can just walk into almost anything and they just know what to do, or they know how to kind of solve stuff from first principles. So I kind of, as most people would do in that situation, I immediately went on the internet and just started binge reading all of the getting started tutorial information I could find. And I was kind of a little put off, to be honest, because none of it seemed to be what I was really after. It was all very specific and kind of narrow in focus. So got a little bit turned off in that, because really I wanted to be, able to roll with punches, do anything, and getting really good at a specific tool or a specific platform wasn't really what I was into. So I pretty much just I went for the trial and error approach at that point. Anything that kind of looked interesting to me, like any piece of software, I would just try and take it apart and see how far I got. And I failed. I failed an awful lot of times doing this, and I've got to tell you, there's nothing more frustrating, right, than knowing you are doing the wrong thing, but you just don't have the right search query or the right question to ask in order to actually get back on the right track. So yeah, that was a little demoralizing. But after a while, after a few goes around the block, I started to eke out a few small victories here and there. I managed to slowly kind of piece a few things together, and more importantly, I could start to see that for all of these reverse engineering techniques, there were these invisible kind of threads that were connecting all of the ones of the same type. And in fact, for all the really hard techniques, the ones that I just kind of wrote off as being, oh, this is way out of my league, there's actually 2 or 3 steps before that, there's an easier version of that same technique. And by practicing the easier one, the skills and the confidence will transfer over to the harder one. And when I figured this out, I was like, how come no one has ever taught this before? How come no one told me that by just doing the easy thing a lot of times, I would get better at the harder thing? And it's very strange, because we're at this stage now where there's, I guess, so much quality material, especially on the internet, in the form of write-ups, videos, getting started tutorials, and it all seems to be just kind of focused on the view from the top of the mountain rather than the path you need to take up the side to get there. So basically, yeah, as I said, we're just going to kind of talk about rules of thumb today, and hopefully, with luck, they'll just give you the foothold you need to get started. So, very good talk etiquette, begin with the definition. So, reverse engineering, it is a discipline that is focused around gaining an understanding of how a system works. That's pretty much it. So, we're talking about software today, obviously, but when we say system, we could mean anything. We could mean a secret microchip, we could mean a mechanical process, we could mean an ice cream flavor. Like, all of these things can be reverse engineered, pretty much anything man-made. And when we're reverse engineering, it's important that we have a goal. The goal can be anything, it's up to you, but it's nice to have a goal so we know what we're trying to get out of this experience. And a very common goal for some people is just to extract some information from the system. Sometimes it can just be like an encryption key for a DVD player or some assets from a game, just getting some information out. Other times, you might be doing some reverse engineering in order to create or improve on a design that you're making at the moment. That's really important, especially if you're trying to, for instance, create a drop-in replacement for an existing system, say like, Wine or Samba replacing Windows services. And also for emulators, generally when you're making an emulator, you want to be able to prepare for every single edge case, and reverse engineering will help you with that. And then my favorite one at the end is just the idea of extending a system beyond what was originally intended by the original designer. And this is so great because it's just pure creativity at this point. Like the system's there, it's acting as a sort of writing prompt, but computers being what they are, it's entirely up to you what happens after that. It's incredibly intoxicatingly good. Now, I'm not going to fall into the trap here of saying that reverse engineering is so easy, everyone can do it, because I kind of hate it when talks do that. I mean, reverse engineering is challenging. It is quite challenging. After all, that's kind of part of the appeal. That's why it kind of is so interesting. But what it doesn't have to be is impossible, or at the very least, gated off to a select few people. And unfortunately, for the longest time, as far as time immemorial goes, there's been this kind of stagnant elitism around the entire field of reverse engineering, and it sickens me a little bit. So this is probably a good time to stamp out some cancerous myths about reverse engineering. The first one is not really said out loud that I want to talk about. It's more just kind of like a growing background noise, and it's the idea that it is somehow inherently competitive. Now, you sort of get this more when you're kind of reading, especially in the tech press. The tech press always like to cover reverse engineering in terms of, say, oh, who can hack a browser the fastest, or who can jailbreak this device first, or who can wipe the most points on Intel stock price in a single day. There's always competition that's seen. And yet, reverse engineering does not have a time limit. It is not got a scoring system. It is just, it's like painting. There's no correct speed to do it. It is what it is. Another big family of, falsehoods that are kind of trafficked are the ones that are the imaginary prerequisites, the things that you've got to have before you even start. And one of the ones that are kind of the most plausible is that if you're going to try and attack a reverse engineering problem, you need to know everything about the target. And this kind of, it sounds alright. I mean, it's going to help, right? Obviously knowing everything about the target is going to help. In actual fact, all you need to know is where the documentation is. And for software, that's probably going to be, the platform documentation, the API, that level of information. If it's a console, maybe the homebrew community, but basically just where you need to go to find information. Everything else you can just learn as you go. In fact, it's probably going to be quicker than pre-learning and then trying to dredge it up. Another one that comes up a lot is, you have to know C. Oh, C is so important. Every operating system is written in C. You have to know C. It is not true. There is an overlap between, knowledge of how C works and knowledge of how CPU executes code. But to gain an understanding of the latter, you don't need to know C. You can absolutely learn that by itself. Completely made up. Another one that comes up is you have to know assembly language. Oh my god, it's going to be in assembly language, so clearly you need to know how to read it in order to be able to reverse it. Again, it is not true. This one surprised me a little because it was repeated so many times. But especially when you kind of think there's maybe hundreds of different CPU types out there and you want to be ready for any of them. So tying yourself down to one, being knowledgeable in one will make you a bit faster, but that's about it. And you're going to have to kind of trust me a little bit on this, but you do not need to know every language, even if you are trying to read it. And this last one, Has anyone ever had that kind of conversation with someone where they say something along the lines of, oh no, I'll definitely go to the gym with you this week, definitely. I just gotta get fit first. That's it, I just gotta get fit and then I'll be ready to go to the gym. It's just that. And then finally, like the no true Scotsman fallacy, the idea that it doesn't count as reverse engineering unless it meets some kind of ridiculous, level of flaming hoops that are jumped through. And a common one is that if someone has ever done reverse engineering in an area before, it doesn't count if you've done it. And those people, I guess, just don't know how research works. Usually there's more than one person in succession that does it. And finally, this is the one that kind of jabs at my pain neurons the hardest, and that is, it's only reverse engineering if it looks sufficiently painful and complex. And this one gets trafficked around so much, and I hate it because this is the root of why it is so exclusionary and self-reinforcing. If you are using reverse engineering techniques, you are reverse engineering. That's it. It doesn't have to be really hard, it doesn't have to be complex, there's no other level than that. Hopefully, oh my god, sorry, getting worked up here. So, just very quickly, we want to talk about 3 different categories of technique. There are 3 rough categories that you can fit every kind of reverse engineering technique into. The 3 would be, I guess, black box analysis, which is basically just like messing with the inputs and outputs that go into a piece of software. There's dynamic analysis, which is like sticking probes into a piece of software as it runs to figure out exactly what it's doing. And then the static analysis, where you just kind of like splay the software out, open on the table, and you try and just infer things from just reading what you have. And it's always good to have at least 2 of these approaches handy, because generally, sometimes you won't have all 3. If you have all 3, that's brilliant, but like for instance, at the moment, I'm trying to disassemble this firmware on this Quark synthesizer that I have, and the CPU doesn't have built-in debug, so I can't do dynamic, but I can do the other 2. I can rip the firmware, which is static, and then I can change it and float it, which is black box. So if you have less than 2, you're going to have a difficult time, but at least 2, you're fine. Now, can I just get a show of hands in the room, how many people have done something that they would class as reverse engineering before? That's pretty good. I reckon we can do slightly better. How many people have opened up the dev tools in Firefox or Chrome? Yeah, that's quite a few. More specifically, how many people have opened the network tab and watched the traffic coming in and out? Sick. All right, you guys, you've all done black box engineering. You've done black box analysis right here. In fact, I love the dev tools because you get all 3. You get black box analysis in the network tab, you get dynamic analysis in the debug tab, and you get static analysis in the inspector, and also get the debug. But let's not focus on that. Let's keep going. All right, so today I'm going to try and cover 3 fairly complicated techniques, one from each of the categories. It's going to be straddling the fence a bit between the accessible and the technical, so if I've gone too far off the deep end, please yell at me afterwards. This is the first time I've been kind of trying to teach in this capacity before, so it's the only way that I'll learn. So the first skill that I kind of want to talk about today is, it's like an age-old useful one, and that's reading mystery data. Now, data comes from all sorts of places when you're reverse engineering. It can come from files, it can come from memory dumps, it can come from tracking captures, and if we're very lucky, it'll be a standard format. It'll be something that we know and love, like zip or PNG or JSON. But usually we're not that lucky, and it just turns out to be just some blob, some mystery blob that we don't know what's in it. So the question is, how do we find out what is in these mysterious blobs? The answer is to go down a level. So, data for the most part is made up of bytes. A byte is basically just, you can think of it as like a single number between 0 and 255, or 8 bits, or 00 to FF in hexadecimal. And 256 choices, that's pretty small. So thankfully, there are a number of, I guess, like standard ways of representing like bigger things, such as larger numbers or strings, using a sequence of bytes, and those are kind of known as encodings. So there are a bunch of little examples there of some of the more popular ways of encoding things in bytes, such as, I guess, 2's complement for negative integers, and UTF-8 for big strings and such. That's right. And of course, we need some tools. We need some tools that can help us work at this byte level. And the most common one for doing this kind of thing is a hex editor. Now, hex editors are probably a lot of you have used a hex editor at some point if you're from a development background. They're basically just like text editors, but they just have this nice big pane here showing you what the byte layout is inside your mystery file. They are amazing for black box analysis. You can do things like get a program to save a file, edit things and see how it reacts, make a save before and after a change, and then try and compare manually which one is slightly different. And there are a lot of hex tools out there, and unfortunately there's no easy answer for which one is the best. My advice, try them all. Literally try them all, find one that speaks to you, and use that. If I could make one piece of advice, try and see if it does statistics, and you'll probably see why in a little minute. So, now for the shameless plug part of the talk. I really quite like taking apart binary file formats, and in fact I was doing it so long I got so sick and tired of having to write boilerplate, I made myself a little helper library. It is called Histocrowbar. It is a Python framework, and the idea is that you can basically go from binary file to structured Python objects to back again in as few lines of code as possible. So, and it also contains some cool visualization tools which we're going to be using in the next few slides just to demo some stuff. So if that kind of thing sounds like it would be interesting to you at all, by all means, I encourage you to check it out. Alright, so I think it would be good at this point to just kind of show a few examples of things that you can find when you're just spelunking, when you're just digging into a random file to just try and find things. And the first is the magic number. Now we were talking before about, I guess, standard files and how good standard files are and how useful they are. And to be honest, in this day and age, you'd be mad not to use a standard file if one exists. There's no point in reinventing the wheel for something like an image. There's a whole bunch of libraries which will open PNG and JPEG for you for free. But at the same time, companies really distrust reverse engineers. They don't trust us at the slightest. So if they use a standard file format, sometimes they'll hide it in something else. But thankfully, we're a little savvy, so we can dig a little deeper. And so here's a random selection of standard files from my hard drive, hopefully nothing too incriminating in there. And all of them can be identified by a magic number, so I'll just highlight them up here. A magic number is basically just a small sequence of bytes that happen usually at the very start of the file, and that just indicates what the file is. And as you can see, there's kind of different ones for each of the different file types, and they come in various different forms. But the trick is basically, if you're looking through your hex editor at something that you don't know what it is, and you see something that looks like a magic number, so like a little tiny string at the start, plug it into your search engine. You'll probably find out what it is. Someone will probably have beat you to it and look up what it is. Another big one is the lookup table. So this is actually an example of an old file, an archive, a game archive that I pulled from somewhere. It's from an old DOS game. And this is the very start of the file. And you can see there's definitely a big pattern going along here. You can see there's definitely these large rows of, it seems like groups of 4, right? Big groups of 4. And in fact, that's pretty much what they are. These are 32-bit integers, so 4 bytes is representing one number. And normally that would be enough of a discovery, the fact that this is just clearly a big list of numbers. But we can actually make some inferences about what's going on. So for instance, if you take the very first group of 4 from this, you can see that there's 353. The number is 353. And in fact, there are 353 list entries after that. Coincidence. Also, if you pick each of these numbers in here, you can't really see it here, but you can take my word for it. They're going up in size, and they are less than the total size of the file, which is a game archive. So that could be of significance. If we were to pick one of these and then jump to the spot of the file which corresponds to the number, oh, look at that. We've got something that looks clearly like some game data that they didn't want us to see. And then just to top it up, we can look at the next group. There's another group of 4 actually at the very start, and that turns out to be the size of what the file is. And so you won't see this exact kind of layout, but it's a good example of, I guess, it's used quite a lot, especially in situations where you don't have very much memory, because this is very cheap and easy for the CPU to to load these just straight from the disk and to read through them. And it's also very lazy for the programmers to write, so programmers love these because there's no validation. Just jump, whiz around the file using these. But yes, that's pretty good. This is more of a fun one. The general rule of thumb is if you see something in the hex dump that looks sort of like a picture, it probably probably actually is. As we said before, there's like basically, you would be mad to use a standard file for an image, but at the same time, they take a lot, they're a real pain to actually use. Sometimes you just want a graphic, right? And this here is an example of like a 256 color image, so every byte is 1 pixel. There's a width and a height hidden somewhere else inside the data file. Don't have to care where about, but if you do apply them, it looks something like this. So always kind of be on the lookout. You may have to like adjust like the width and the start position of your hex viewer, but you can sometimes make things line up to look like an image, and then get something like that. Another really cool looking one is raw audio. Now this comes up quite a lot. So you can see here, like if you look at the data, it looks pretty random. I would not be able to make heads or tails of that. But then you bring out the statistics. So looking at the statistics for all of those bytes, you can see there's this nice saddle shape. And that definitely doesn't look random. That looks like it's kind of a nice uniform curve. And in fact, if that's just for like that tiny sample. If you feed the entire thing into there, it's perfectly smooth. And that's like a really interesting property, I guess, of raw audio, because it's like a wave and it's always kind of going up and above the like the origin point of the sound wave. It leads to these really nice symmetrical distributions, and it works both like for pretty much any type of number that you put into there too. So if you see something with this is basically a histogram, so there's like one column for every single byte, and it's just counting the number of each. So if you have a histogram which looks perfectly symmetrical, it's probably audio. And in fact, I was procrastinating when writing the talk, so I actually made another tool. I really like the histogram, so I made another tool which would just go through a file, slice it up, and give a histogram for each line. And it was actually, I quite enjoy this, because from this, you can actually kind of make out what's in the file without actually seeing anything in it. Like, for instance, at the very top, you can see there's a nice big square in the second quadrant of the top line. And that happens to be, the second quadrant happens to be where all the ASCII letters are, like, so all the alphabet characters. And believe it or not, yes, it's ASCII text in that area. Underneath, that kind of weird, fingery looking kind of tapestry monstrosity underneath, that's actually x86 code. This game is pretty old. It bundled the sound drivers with it, basically. But you can tell that it's kind of code because it's not really compressed, and like these long fingers are like the instructions which are the most popular, like mov or add or something. Now, underneath that, we don't really know what it is. It's kind of compressed. You can kind of, just to go back, you can kind of see that it's not fully solid, which means that it's compressed well, so it's compressed really badly. You can still make out some detail, but it's still, there's no black areas, which means that it is compressed to some degree. And then on the right-hand side, as we said before, it's symmetrical, it is probably audio. And in fact, you can see they try to apply the crappy compression to that, which is why there's noise on the side, but because audio doesn't compress, it just looks like that. So they probably wasted more space by doing that, but I'm not going to call down on it. And then finally, okay, so when you kind of see this is probably the point at which black box analysis has kind of run its course. So basically, this is the same file compressed in 3 different ways. And bottom left is zip-based compression, and the bottom right is the same, but with like RSA encryption applied. So if the histogram is perfectly square, it means it's indistinguishable from random noise. Dollars to donuts, it's going to be encrypted. But and yeah, similarly, if there's like barely any entropy, there's a lot of entropy in the encrypted ones. And like at this point, you can't really just determine how it's compressed by looking at it. You need to go a level deeper and look at the code. But hopefully that's like a good demo of the kind of things you can just kind of observe by looking through the right lens. I strongly encourage you to just open up every single file you come across on your travels, and you will learn so much. All right, so secondly, I want to have a little talk about troubleshooting any problem. A very key part of reverse engineering in the software space is just inspecting the code as it runs. It's an extremely good method of gaining evidence of what the program is actually doing, as opposed to just trying to guess. And I mean, it's really tempting to guess sometimes, but it is quite nice just to be able to have the CPU tell what's going on. And this is, equally good for reverse engineering, but very good for troubleshooting as well, especially if you've never seen the system before and you need to get like a very quick leg up to fix it. So for this, we need to whip out the debugger. The debugger is the most powerful hammer in the reverse engineering toolbox. It is just, so on the screen there is a GDB, which is like the popular debugger that comes with Linux. They come in kind of GUI and command line flavors, but generally they're mostly command line. Actually, so yeah, debuggers let you view the code as it runs. You can stop it at any point. You can query or change the state, so you can query or change any variable as it runs. You can pretty much just have complete control over what is happening while the program is up. Most of them are actually source code optional, so if you have the source code for a piece of application, that's cool. It will show you the source code like it does up there. But if you don't, then it will fall back onto the level underneath, which is to say, these are the exact instructions that the CPU is executing. And the other nice thing about the debugger is it won't lie to you. It's on your side. It is one of the few tools that won't stab you in the back or mislead you down the wrong path. Like everything that happens in there is almost guaranteed to be not a lie, which is quite nice. But there are like a couple of downsides. First one is most of them are really complicated. Like to give you an example, like GDB, if you run GDB help all, you'll get 1,291 lines of text. That's a bonkers number of features that you're never going to use. And like to make things slightly more annoying, most debuggers are kind of platform specific. You can't just learn one. You've got to kind of be able to roll with it and flick to whatever's the best one for your platform. Like for instance, if you're on an emulator, there will be a debugger built into that, and you want to use the native one rather than obviously the system one. But it's not quite as bad. I'm being a little melodramatic here because out of all of that, you just need to know how to, out of all the features there, you just need to know how to use 4. Just 4. I'm not trying to be funny or anything, you only need to use 4. The rest are cool if you know how to use the rest, but the only 4 features you really need to know is, I guess, like how to step the code, so how to move backwards and forwards and continue. You need to know how to set breakpoints, obviously, so be able to like pick a spot where you want it to stop. You need to be able to know how to view states, so I guess how to list what's inside a variable, or if you're going hardcore, what's inside like a register. And then view the current stack trace, and that's basically just like the big list of calls which has the program has taken to reach the current position. And once you know how to do all of those 4 things, the debugger is yours. As we said, the other features can be useful. Don't like it. Things like watch points. If you know how to use a watch point, it'll probably make you quicker. But you don't need it. You can get away with just those 4. And debugger is one of those cases where I was talking about before. You can basically practice. You can practice using it, and the skills will transfer over to the slightly harder variant. So some of the best training you can get for reverse engineering is just to troubleshoot lots and lots of things using the debugger, especially when you have the source code. So it'll make you better at moving around the program. It'll kind of sharpen your investigative wits. And later on, when you don't have the source code, that muscle memory is still there. You'll still be able to kind of make all these inferences, and you'll be fine. So we don't really kind of have time to go into too much detail, but I just wanted to quickly run through the formula, I guess like the steps of how to investigate with the debugger, ideally with the source code. I'd share my routine. This isn't prescriptive, you do not have to follow this to the letter. It's more important that you find a way that kind of works for you, but it's important to just kind of quickly talk about it. So for me, the steps are basically, first step is always to kind of reproduce the behavior in a test environment. So behavior, of course, could be like a problem or a feature that you're investigating. Quite often this is the hardest step, just actually getting it to run with the debugger there. But it's important, and get better at it. Secondly is to establish the boundaries of the system. If your system is using a bunch of, say, like helper libraries, make sure that you can kind of like, I guess, either include them or eliminate them. It's about like kind of fencing off the code to just the bit that you want to investigate, pretty much. Third one is basically just to observe for points of interest. Now, a point of interest would be anything interesting that happens, or any kind of symptoms that would happen, for instance, during a problem, like the specific wording of an error message. And the idea is that you're trying to kind of figure out, I guess, what state inside the program is flipping between good and bad. Like if there's a specific check that's failing, you've got to like make a note of what that check is, and then just make like a short list of these things. Fourth is to find an entry point close to one of these points of interest. So an entry point is just literally open up the program, the debugger, place a breakpoint at one of these things that you found in step 3, and run to it. And then finally, trace through to the exact moment that it actually happens. So this is basically, it requires a few goes, but the trick is to just kind of step through the code, keep an eye on any of that state, try and figure out the point where it's flipping from good to bad. If you do find a spot where it has kind of flipped from good to bad, work backwards, try and figure out what has caused that chain of events to reach that specific spot, to find out what caused the check to be busted, for instance. And that's pretty much it. That is just reverse engineering when you have the source code. It is, by practicing this, again, it's just about etching in the muscle memory the moments, and when you have no source code, the procedure is pretty much exactly the same with a few slight modifications. I highly encourage you to just get as much practice with the debugger as possible if you are a developer, and if you can, just challenge yourself. Pick a favorite open source project that you would otherwise just kind of write off as being too hard, and try and fix the bug. Even if you don't actually fix the bug, you will learn a crazy amount in like a small amount of time, way more than you want to know, but it's important that you do know. And okay, final area of discussion. This is the big one. How to understand any program, how to read an app without the original source code. I wanted to do this for ages. I was just like power mad on the possibilities that would open up. And it seemed such like a great thing. And so yeah, it took me about several attempts over about 5 years to be truly comfortable with it. And in hindsight, I just didn't know how to investigate properly, so I didn't really get very far. But let's talk a bit about assembly language. As you might recall, we've got the debugger. You can break down to the assembly language, but you can only see it through this tiny window, right? This tiny window that follows where the current progress is in the code. And it's kind of difficult. It's very difficult to make any kind of long-term observations when you've just got that tiny window. What would be good is if we had a tool which could print out the entire sheaf of all of the assembly language from the program. Then we can go over it at our leisure. We can just make some notes. We can just casually observe some things. Maybe come back later after we've had a coffee. Then, once we've got some ideas, we can go to the debugger and apply them. Thankfully, there's a tool for that. It is called the disassembler. The job of the disassembler is to convert all of your program's code back into human-readable assembly language, so you can go through it and document it with your findings. Some disassemblers will just give you the code. Other ones, the fancy ones are like this one. This is IDA. This is the free version of IDA, which is the undisputed queen of disassemblers. It is very fancy. It will let you go through. You can rename all of the functions. It'll trace through and find out where all the memory usages are and such. And it also supports like a massive number of CPUs. So for the most part, quite a lot of things will be covered out of the box. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive, and it's also worth looking into, especially if you, depending on what platform you're going on, it's always worth looking into what is the best tool for the job. Like for instance, .NET and Java, they both have decompilers, which are even nicer than disassemblers. But yeah, it's just about making notes, basically, just going through the code, what you've got there, and making notes. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's still pretty incomprehensible. In fact, I told you earlier that you didn't need to know how to read this, and like, it's looking very much like you will have to. Like, how are we meant to start? How are you meant to kind of start when you can't read the thing? So, sorry to get all educational, but we've got to have like a little bit of discussion about how a program is running on the CPU. Don't have to like care about the loading or anything. That's not important. What's really important is that it's mostly just going to be a CPU and an address space. Right. So the address space is pretty much just every address that the CPU can read or write to. And this space, it's a mapping. It doesn't correspond to like a single memory chip or anything. There are these segments that are carved out, and they can point to anywhere. They can point to the memory, they can point to the disk, they can point to wherever, the hardware, wherever is convenient. And that's good for the CPU, because then the CPU doesn't have to care about hardware. It just has to care about where stuff is in the memory space, also the address space. And all the stuff that's in here is everything that our program needs to run is in this address space. So there'll be a nice big segment at the top of the code. Underneath that, there'll be some static data, which is like all the stuff that the compiler knew about, like the globals and the static strings and such. Memory, of course, we'll need memory too. There'll be like a big stack of temporary memory at the bottom there, which is known as the stack. And of course, the program can ask the operating system for more memory when it's running. So every time it does that, it'll add like a new segment known as a heap allocation into here. Oh crap, talking about the operating system, we'll also need to include the entire operating system kernel in a big segment down the bottom there, just in case we need like one thing from that. We'll have to have the entire operating system in there. And then, the same logic also applies, I guess, for any helper libraries. So obviously, if we have shared libraries that we use in this program, they're going to have a segment as well. Now, that's the address space cover, but now the CPU. So I'm going to let you know a little secret. Most CPUs kind of work exactly the same. Now, bear with me on this, because I know they're quite different, but you can make a bunch of assumptions about how CPU is going to look. There's going to be a bunch of registers. These are basically just variables, right? They can hold like one number or one memory address, and these are used for basically just like maths or reading and writing to the memory and such like that. But yeah, general purpose registers. And there'll probably be like a couple of special ones too. Like there's always like going to be a special register which points to where we are in the code. Like it will always be that. So every time we execute an instruction, it will move that program counter a bit forward. There'll always be a flags register, so this is kind of how if statements and such are evaluated on the CPU. Basically, every time an instruction runs, it will change the flags register based on, say, it will ask the question, is this value 0, or is this value a negative number, or is this value overflowed, or something like that. And then it will set that, which can then be inspected by downstream code. And that's how the statements work, scientifically. And then finally, there'll be one more special register which points to the temporary memory of the stack. We don't quite have time to fully go into what this does, but just imagine it's most useful for when you run out of registers. So 4 isn't really that many registers. There are times when you want to remember more than 4 things at once, and the stack just allows you to basically, it's a first in, last out queue, and you can put in as much stuff as you want and pull as much stuff out as you want using instructions on the CPU. So that's why we have a special register for that. Now, part where it all clicks for me is that by itself, the CPU doesn't actually do very much interesting stuff. It just does, it's good at doing maths, it's good at reading and writing to memory, and doing stuff with registers. That's about it. For anything useful, it has to ask for help, or anything interesting. So like for reading or writing a file, it's got to ask for help. If it's drawing something to the screen, it's got to ask for help. If it's got to like play a sound, it's got to ask for help. And how does it ask for help, I need to ask? Well, shared libraries again. So obviously to do any of these things, it's going to call either the shared library or the kernel. And these are public APIs, which means we still have the names. Now, for the most part, when you disassemble something, unless you're really lucky and you get a debug version, you're not going to be able to see any of the names, but you will be able to see where all of these public APIs are being called. And it's incredibly useful. For instance, say I was trying to kind of figure out how file loading was working, to be able to say, oh, okay, so there's 28,000 different functions in this random exe that I'm looking at, but only 2 of them call read file. Maybe file loading is somewhere in just those 2 rather than 28,000. But it is incredibly useful to be able to kind of make those connections. And from there, it's basically just sort of tracing through and filling in the blanks as you go. Like for instance, you'd be able to say that you can see from which files are being accessed, you can see where the data is being copied to, you can see if there's any processing like decompression or whatever that's happening before it's moving on somewhere else. And they all provide hints about what the components of the disassembled program are for, and how you can chain these deductions to kind of get a more rich picture of what is going on exactly. Now, you're thinking, hang on, he's just kind of evading the issue here. You haven't actually talked about the assembly language thing. So, okay, you're probably not going to like what you hear, but this is the truth. So, basically CPU vendors, they really want you to use their CPUs, right? So, one of the things they'll provide you is a document called an instruction set reference. And it's basically just a giant PDF explaining what every single instruction in the CPU actually does. So what you have to do is you have to get this PDF, you open in one window, You open up a brand new text file in another window, and you copy each line into whatever format you need to think the least about. So mine is like Python with gotos, as you can kind of see. But basically just like line by line, convert it to whatever format you don't have to think the most about. And it sounds slow and backbreaking, but you have two advantages. One, you only have to do it for the things that are interesting. And as we've established, you can filter out the things that are not interesting quite quickly. And secondly, it's basically that it sounds slower, but you've got to trust me here, it's actually quicker than just like staring at something written in mystery moon language and then trying to define what it is. Just being able to see in front of you, oh, it's doing that. And then of course, like the first pass is going to look quite rough. It's going to look very rough like this, but afterwards you can chip away with it. You can just slowly add more and more things that you found out. And just to be clear, this is like a tiny snippet. The actual function that I took this from is like 300 lines, but we don't have that type in here. But from that you can trace through, you can slowly figure out, I guess, what the inputs and outputs are, slowly percolate those back up the chain, and you'll get, after, well, I think it was 8 passes for me, you get something like this. And you can kind of make out where the, other variables were stemming from, but again, if you have the entire function there, you can trace through. You can slowly, even if they're not correct guesses, you can just make guesses, and more often than not, they'll be right. And really, that's all there is to it. Like, once you have that entry point from which you can make more discoveries and cross-check back with the live code on the debugger, it's basically there. You can read any program. And much like debugging, the skill just comes more with, I guess, amount of time spent. You know, you get more confident and experienced the more times you try this, even if you don't succeed. So if this sounds like something that you've ever wanted to try and do, I recommend just giving it a shot just once, just to see how it turns out. Unfortunately, we're almost at the end of our time here today. Sorry again if I rushed. This was like quite a lot of information. I cried literal tears of having to rip information out of this presentation. Please, by all means, hit me up at the end if there are any particular questions that you need answered. But if there's one thing that I hope to have kind of like shared and like for people to take away with today, it's the idea that it's possible to get started in some of the very hardest areas of reverse engineering without knowing very much, or indeed anything in my case. But you can come out the other side much stronger and ready to progress up the chain to more and more complicated things. Not more complicated, more interesting things. And in closing, I just wanted to say the absolute best tool that there is for reverse engineering is just passion. Because once, basically, this is truly is a field where perseverance outweighs absolutely everything, including skill. And once you if you really enjoy what you're doing, you will be unstoppable. Also, tell everyone how you did it, because sharing is caring. Thank you, everybody.
We have a couple of minutes for questions, so I'll be running around and getting them off with everyone. So, does anyone have any questions?
What's the best thing you've done in reverse engineering? Or the thing you're most proud of?
So I'll just repeat the question.
Yep.
What's the thing you were most proud of reverse engineering, or yes?
Can I count something that I'm in the middle of doing?
Definitely.
Okay. Probably the thing that I'm like the most keen about at the moment is I'm trying to reverse, Macromedia Director? Yeah, at the moment I'm trying to kind of work on the engine for that for ScumVM, mostly just because, not sure if a lot of you won't be aware, there's this great series of educational games by Teresa Duncan, and like for the longest time, I paid for this Kickstarter and there was like a streaming version that they were giving, and it just didn't seem as good. I thought, well, okay, I wanted to work on the ScumVM, and it makes sense, right, to preserve the things that are like important. And this particular series was critically acclaimed, but it only runs on like Windows 3.1, so absolutely no one is going to view it unless someone steps up and preserves it for later on. So that would be my entirely pompous, self-interested answer to your question.
A lot of software has a legal restriction on reverse engineering, and while it might be fun to do it as a one-off for your own use, there's it probably makes it difficult to actually then distribute anything that you've done.
I guess that would like depend on the exact agreement that you entered into when you got the software in the first place. I'm no legal expert, so again, don't take any legal advice from me. You'll probably end up in jail. But what was the exact thrust of your question?
Well, I was just wondering if you had any comments about that, and I guess in terms of so whether it's actually feasible to distribute the results of your work when you weren't allowed to do it.
Could I just repeat the question for the recording, just to make sure? So, if you are reverse engineering and you want to share the results of that, are there any legal implications?
I think so long as your solution doesn't actually incorporate code from the product itself, you should be mostly okay. Again, this is like from my non-lawyer saying.
Cool. We'll grab one more and then time for morning tea. Okay, we'll leave it there. Everyone, please remember your feedback. It's really important to be able to win any of the prizes. You need to give your feedback, and morning tea is available upstairs. Thank you.